The Austin Film Society started in 1985 as this very loose but very passionate assortment of film freaks who felt most alive when the lights went down and the projector cranked up. And over 30 years, that's what we've nurtured. Journey for us to get here, and I'm so proud of the film site, you know, what it's become, where it's at right now.
Dobry den. My name is Peter DeBruge with Variety. I'm Texan, as are these three filmmakers today. Thank you for joining us as we chat about the history and legacy and future of Texas film. Let's welcome three incredible independent filmmakers. To your left, Richard Linklater. Richard's the only one of us who was born in Texas, I believe. You probably know him from films like Boyhood, Slacker, Dazed and Confused. He's got a long list of films you would know.
The only real Texan.
The only real Texan. David Zellner and his brother Nathan have two films in the festival. Damsel is their latest film with Robert Pattinson. They also made a film called Kid Thing that is here. They did a film that's a kind of squirrely, crazy riff on Fargo called Kumiko the Treasure Hunter. They're two eccentrics who are living out of Austin, Texas now. Like me, I think you moved there when you were 10, right? And then the sort of the youngest Texan by amount of time spent in Texas, right? Is Andrew Bujalski at the end of the line here. Andrew has two films in the festival as well. Computer Chess, which benefited from the Austin Films. All these guys are tied to the Austin Film Society. And the latest is Support the Girls, right? Which launched at the South by Southwest Film Festival. It's kind of a look inside a Hooters-like restaurant. So there's a chance for you to catch up with films by all these guys. Maybe you've already seen some of those films. How many of you guys have seen films by, we know that you've seen movies by Mr. Linklater. How about these two great guys at the end here? Good, so like there'll be some familiarity. Yeah, go ahead, let's hear it for all these guys. All right, so what we really want to do is give you guys a taste of Texas cinema and an organization called the Austin Film Society that Richard Linklater started 32 years ago, is that right?
Coming up on 33.
There you go.
Fall 85, yeah.
85, fall of 85, you say? Yeah.
First program, yeah.
And Texas film has sort of come up with the Austin Film Society, and so we'll sort of start back maybe with a little bit of a history lesson, or just a time machine thing, where we take you back to maybe those early 80s, before you had made Slacker, before you'd even made sort of, you can't learned to plow by reading books.
My Super 8 feature. Yeah.
Right, right. And at this point, well, tell us, like, growing up in Texas, was there anything around you to say that you could make a living being a film director?
No, like, hell no. Like, so far from the thinking of where I grew up. I grew up in, like, a little town in East Texas. Like, you've seen that movie, The Last Picture Show? That's kind of a town in East Texas version. We had one theater. They would bring a new movie every week, but they were always like kind of B movies. It was fun, but I never thought cinema was serious. I didn't take it serious until I was about 20. I just, in college, started watching some movies. It was the early days of VHS. There was an English professor who started showing movies, and I was like, oh. But at that point, I thought I was a writer. So somehow film got a writer, and I was writing plays too. So I had a brief stint in theater, and then when I discovered cinema, that was it. And then I moved to Houston, and just started going to movies. They had a repertory cinemas, and I just started seeing 2 or 3 movies a day. And I actually saw. This is like in the early 80s, and in 84 I'd moved to Austin, but I was back in Houston visiting family, and I opened the paper one day, and the Houston Film Festival was starting, the illustrious Houston Film Festival. But they had Eagle Pinnell was showing last night at the Alamo, and I'd never heard of him. But here's a guy locally, he's 10 years older than me, but he had gotten a grant and had made a feature film. So I went and saw that, and I was just so happy to help co-introduce that film a couple nights ago as a influential Texas film. So there was a lot, and the shorts that are playing here. There was a lot of, there was always filmmaking going on. It was just kind of scattered around, but I found my way into it, and when I got to Austin, I just noticed the campus was showing the same films again, and I was just greedy to see more films, so that's when I just found out you could rent films and show them, and maybe I could hustle people into giving us $2. If, you do the math. If you can rent a film for $100 or $150, you can get 75 people to pay $2. We could do it kind of in a cooperative way. So the Film Society started just wanting to see these films from everywhere. So, but I was making my own films too then, starting to make shorts and teach myself that.
So it's kind of interesting to sort of expand on that, to look at the origins of this organization, and just to give some context. The conversation we're having right now is a complement to this great program that the Austin Film Society has put together, really spotlighting Texas film. And I'm sure you guys have seen that there are maybe 8 features, I think, and nearly as many shorts showing here in the festival that give you a real survey across the years. And a film like Slacker, Rick's real first feature, El Mariachi, which is this, do you guys know the legend of El Mariachi, with Robert Rodriguez, who made this movie for almost no money, that kind of were early parts of Texas film. But this organization that Richard started went on to basically create a whole grant system, and that's something that we're going to be diving into at years down the road from what we're just talking about right now. But from that, it's been able to create an ecosystem for Texas film. And so what you're hearing about right now is sort of the roots of that idea. And the roots of that idea, as Rick just said, started with just as simply wanting to see movies on Texas screens that you couldn't otherwise.
Yeah, it's just film freaks wanting to do what people have always done. Let's bring that to us. And it was educational too. I just wanted to see all these movies while I was working on my own films. And I don't know, it was just fun to do something. I had all this passion for cinema, and it was a good place to channel that. And I found like-minded people around me, and they would become roommates, and people who would work in the film site. So we were this kind of gathering steam loose coalition of people. No one got paid anything. None of us did. It was an all-volunteer organization for 10 years. But pretty soon, a lot of those folks, not all, when I went to make Slacker, I was working on a Super 8 feature, that first film you mentioned, but then it was like, I'm going to make this 16 millimeter feature which was a big deal back then. You know, people didn't make many movies. There was usually one film made a year in Austin, and it was usually an exploitation film, kind of in the legacy of Texas Chainsaw Massacre was made near Austin, and we all love Tobe Hooper. He's kind of a legendary character, but he was from the generation, you know, before us. So, and that wasn't really my genre. I love that movie and kind of appreciate it, but I was trying to show a different part of Texas that wasn't a Western, it wasn't cowboy hats and boots, and it also wasn't like a horror film. So it was something else. So it was fun to get with like-minded people, and you know, that became a crew, and we all were at the same level of, you know, learning how to do it.
There's some really weird credits like that in Texas past. Like I think Piranha was shot in Texas.
Yes, San Marcos. Yeah, San Marcos.
Yeah, and so this situation you're describing is not unique to Texas. Basically, if you wanted to make a movie in the United States, you went to Hollywood or maybe New York, and so the idea of regional independent cinema was something that you were really part of a wave creating, I think.
I think it exists, you know, if you think in the U.S., there's like John Waters makes films in Baltimore. Mm-hmm. George Romero was Mr. Pittsburgh. Who else? You know, there's some people are kind of...
But were people like that more inspirational to you than, say, Texans in a way, who were staying, you know, where they lived?
Oh, I don't know. I don't really remember it thinking like, oh, people who stayed or left, because I was so close to the ground, you know. There weren't that many who had left and done well, as far as I know. King Vidor a long time ago.
Can you tell us how you raised the money to make Slacker? And because in a way, I think
it was one of those no budget hustle, steal stuff, and you know, credit cards, savings, family members. Yeah, I remember I had these. I had signed up. They were giving away credit cards back then, practically, and so I took all these credit cards, and I would just be using them for film stock, just everything, until they would take them away from you.
Yeah, I guess they're like it's like heroin dealers. They're trying to get like college kids to sign up for credit.
And I remember I had an Exxon card because you could get a gas station card, so we could all fill up I couldn't pay any people, but I could help them out. Like, you need a tank of gas here. You know, I could give them the credit card, and while you get your tank of gas, buy Gatorades and water and snacks, because that would be craft service. And then I was there once. I was I gave him the credit card. And I had the counter full of, you know, crap food. And he looked at me and says, "It says to keep your card." And I went, "Oh, I guess it's over." So that was the history of that one card. But there were others. But I got lucky, though. I had made it as a work in progress. Had shot it the summer of '89. Then we showed it as a work in progress in October of '89 in New York at the IFP market, and a German TV station. I will always love this guy, Werner Deutsch at VDR, who I was so thrilled because they had funded all the Fassbinder and, you know, those kind of films. I got a little note from Werner Deutsch, like, "Are the TV rights available?" I'm like, hell yeah. And so I was so blessed. I got enough money to finish it and pay back my parents and pay off the lab, and it was it's a float. But that's how every indie film was made back then. You really put it on the line and risked everything, and, you know, whatever.
But like that hustle is probably, I assume, a big factor in wanting to create this grant system within AFS.
Yeah, part of that hustle, I applied for a grant and got it. I got $2,700. You know, spend it in an afternoon of, I guess, it was all lab was the main cost to get your, you know, negative process and get a work print that you could work from. Yeah, that's where the money went. But I was so grateful. And the feeling I had as a filmmaker, I was at that point 28, 29, and my family was kind of wondering, what are you doing, you know, with your life? I like films. I'm, you know, trying to make films. It just, but once I got a grant for this film I was working on, they're like, "Oh, wow, so they gave you money?" "Yeah, they think it's good." So I was able to get money from them. I parlayed that. You know, if you're going to be a filmmaker, you got to be a hustler. You got to be kind of a cheap hustler. And, you know, you have to have that element anything good that happens, you have to kind of parlay that. So that's how I used the grant, and I thought, oh, it just left an impression on me that that's an important evolutionary step in your life, to get a little bit of outside validation. I mean, we all think we're good, but to hear it from someone else and an organization was very beneficial. So that's really the origin of our grant program, because that grant I got, they did away with. That was in the U.S., we had the National Endowment for the Arts. They were giving money to regional re-granting programs, and the one out of Houston that administrated the grant, they quit funding them. So there were no more grants. So there was a couple years where nothing, and then the Film Society started doing much better. We were in our 10th year, and we said, we should start our own grant program. Sounded kind of crazy, but somehow, some way, we were able to raise money every year, because I think it was a necessary, good thing. So,
well, in a sort of full circle way, it was like that those screenings that you create this organization as an excuse to rent these prints and have a community, and they become your money earner at a certain point. Once you start to be doing big screenings with bigger filmmakers, or once your films start to draw an audience.
Yeah, we had cultivated an audience, and then we were able to raise money by special premieres. Filmmakers I had met would come in and have premieres, and we would raise a lot of money. That's how we started the grant program and the studios, because we had one film, I think, it was my film, Newton Boys, I think, and Ed TV, Matthew came in. We'd make like $50,000 in one night with, people would pay. Austin had changed, people had money, corporations wanted to be involved. The Austin I remember, which was everyone I knew was completely broke, no one had a job, the economy was was non-existent. That had all changed from the 80s to the 90s. It took me a while to figure that out. I remember underpricing. Quentin was coming in for a Pulp Fiction premiere. I'd gotten to know him a little bit, and I said, hey, come to Austin, we'll show you a movie. And we usually charge $2 or $3 at that point for a movie. I said, I think we can charge 10. And it sold out in like 6 minutes. I said, I think we could have charged 20. Yeah, we could have charged 100. But from that point on, I got more aligned with what things were worth.
Well, and David, this is kind of like the period where you enter the picture in terms of your film career. But maybe take us back to you were growing up where in Texas, and was there any idea in your head, maybe you wanted to do this, but did it ever look realistic?
Well,
is your mic on?
Hello. Okay. I grew up a couple hours from Austin in this really conservative town called College Station.
By the way, all of Texas is conservative except
you're right, yeah.
for Austin.
It's an oasis, it's a little bubble. But I mean, and my brother and I, we just were making home movies on VHS, and at that point, like a lot of people, I don't know, before you learn to make initially just copying films that blockbuster stuff a lot. We did a lot of like Vietnam War films with kids in the backyard and the fake blood and toy guns and that sort of thing.
But this is how Steven Spielberg started.
I guess so. Yeah.
So many.
Yeah. And so that was the level we're at with that. But I always thought that it seemed we were doing it just out of passion, just because I felt like just had to. But we didn't know about actually making a career out of it or anything, and just assumed that it was a New York or LA thing, and that everyone in New York or LA was from there, and they just and that everyone else was just going to make home movies, this sort of thing, and then.
Not a career option.
Yeah, it just was not an option. And then I remember when I was getting a senior in high school, and then hearing about Austin was like the big scary city it felt like a metropolis, and it was terrifying when you're in College Station. And I remember hearing about Slacker, and it was made here, and it wasn't like a studio movie, and I remember seeing stills from it, and it was on 16. Whenever I'd see something on 16 millimeter, I'd see, for some reason, associated film grain with it would seem subversive or just underground, or something about it was both interesting to me and kind of I don't know, like terrifying or something. Just
that's not wrong.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
Well, and then, but anyway, then the marketing from Slacker was so. I remember like getting like Premiere magazine, and it was like a different kind of poster than anything I'd seen. And then I didn't see it when it was in its theatrical release, but I remember like renting it right away, and it was like felt like a transmission from another planet. But then at the same, it was so strange to me. But at the same time, it was so relatable because it was from a part of, it's from Texas, and so that was so exciting to me that it was you could do something so original, but and personal without being from Texas and stuff, and so that was a big part of moving to Austin after that.
When you moved to Austin, was it for film school, or
I went to the University of Texas. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so the University of Texas has this big film school, which I know was sort of something that the Austin Film Society has sometimes worked with, but also been independent from. Like one of your board members was one of my college professors, Charles Ramirezberg, and yet there were other board members were from like the local community college. There was
Charlie Memphis was.
I mean, tell us maybe briefly a little bit about when you built the Austin Film Society. Who were the pillars of?
Well, I lived a block from campus. I felt I saw those movies on campus. I felt I never was enrolled, but I was definitely using that school for all I could get out of it, the library, and I felt like an honorary student. But I actually didn't get in. I applied, and they didn't want me. But I had crappy grades. It's not their fault. It's mine.
Well, at the time, it was really hard. Like, I mean, Robert Rodriguez has the same version of the same story.
He got in eventually, yeah. He was in school, but then the film school, it seemed too difficult. I had already gotten ahead of myself. But that said, I had so many friends who were coming out of film school, and the professors I went around. It's impossible to underestimate UT's influence in the area. They're just huge. There's 50,000 students. It's a big school, a lot of resources, and Charles Ramirez-Berg. I met people who liked what we were doing at the Film Society and supported us. We would have students come. I was always trying to hustle students to come to our screenings. They were always a little disappointing. Students are always a little busy. They don't always come. But I remember meeting a young, kind of awkward guy was always hanging out, and I remember thinking years later, like, what happens to guys like that? He clearly loved movies, but he seemed so kind of awkward, dorky, talking to him a few times. And then I was at the New York Film Festival in '01, and I look up, we have this moment of recognition. It's the awkward, dorky UT student who liked movies.
Are both in New York?
Wes Anderson, yeah. He had been in my mind, like, what happens to guys like that? He was a smart guy, but what's he doing now? Is he a professor? What's he doing? It was Wes.
That's actually an important name to mention.
He was the one, and that's not insignificant. Because, he was young, he was a freshman in college, but because he loved movies, he was there, you know? He had found us. We didn't have to go, I'd go to these other students, they're like, hey, we're showing a Fassbender retrospective. And they're like, oh, I'm trying to make films, not watch films. I'm like, okay. What does that mean? So to this day, when I talk to film students, I was like, what movies are you watching? If they it's like, you're not going to make it. If you don't, I've never met a filmmaker who doesn't live, breathe, eat movies. You're not going to, whatever. You can't instill that in someone. They have to have it. But those who have it, and you recognize it. So,
Andrew, you were from Boston, not in Texas.
Yeah, that's like Massachusetts is the anti-Texas, but yeah.
Very much.
Yeah.
So tell us what your first connection was. I'm guessing it was through the sort of South by Southwest Film Festival, perhaps?
No, I'm sure the first I ever heard of Austin was as a teenager going to see Slacker with my dad. at the Key Theater in Georgetown.
Your dad took you to Slacker?
And my dad
That's
slept
a cool
through.
dad.
Yeah, well, because I was a movie crazy kid, so my dad was supportive of like you want to go to the weird movies, I'll take you to the weird movies. But he slept through it, and then he woke up and said it was the worst movie he ever saw. But I argued. First of all, I said, "Dad, you were asleep, so how can you say that?" But I was smitten. I love the movie, and then a couple years after that, Dazed and Confused. So that was like most of what I knew about Austin was those two movies. And there was y'all put out this great kind of like coffee table book, this paperback, the Slacker book was fantastic. And it was this great book that had, I think it had like a whole kind of breakdown of the movie, but it also had little bios on everybody who was in it, almost like, I don't know if there was a map, but you knew where all the locations were. And so I think for reasons that I can't fully articulate, especially with jet lagged, I always had, Texas always appealed to me, maybe because it did seem so foreign to where I was coming from. And so a little after college, in the late 90s, I moved there kind of arbitrarily just because it sounded fun. And I was at an age where I needed no better reason to move than somewhere sounded fun. And essentially, just on like what I had learned from these two movies and this book, that was my guide to Austin. In the book in particular, I was like, well, okay, I'm going there. I'm going to that coffee shop. And all those people were still around at that point. The whole Slacker cast, you just see them walking down the street.
They're not even celebrities.
They might still be there.
They may well.
The ones that are still alive.
Yeah. So that was it. And, and I went and I volunteered for the Film Society and saw a bunch of movies there. And
that's a lot earlier than I realized.
Well, then I left for a long time, then I came back.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So you had an early chapter in the late 90s, which is the same period that Rick was describing with when the Film Society really started doing the fundraising screenings, when the Quentin Tarantino connection brought this thing called the QT Fest to town. And so Tarantino would come with like these practically rosy red bleached prints of his like old exploitation and Italian.
Quentin started, as soon as he had any extra cash, he started collecting prints. And Quentin, he's not real picky, so he'd be like, well, you mentioned, he's like, I got a print. And he just had all these prints. Like, I want to come show them. Like, yeah, we'll just watch movies. And we sold tickets, and he came, and it was great. The print quality was all over the map. But that was kind of what he's about. He's not an elitist. He's the opposite. It's like, this print from the 70s is pretty pink. It's kind of pink. But, it's the movie, and, he probably paid $75 for that print. And here we were watching it completely with no rights, nothing. It's an underground, illegal screening. People sneaking in alcohol. But it was like a fun, unofficial film festival that he could we started doing those once a year, because that's what he loves to do.
Well, when you think about the way that he makes movies, which are so referential, like anyone who's like, we like Quentin Tarantino, this was like the window into his brain.
Often he would do, if you knew what he was doing, he would be writing, or for 2 years in a row, he showed only films about like revenge. Mm-hmm. He was about to make his revenge movies. He was like, I'm really obsessed with it. So every movie is some Italian horror film where they're out and they're sticking things in the guy's eyes. And, it's like, okay, revenge was the vibe. But he just showed all kinds of wonderful films.
And now he has bought a theater and is basically doing that, the New Beverly in Los Angeles. But
that was his theater that he went to, and then he was supporting. They were struggling like all indie cinemas. It's hard to keep that going. So I'm sort of tickled today that he's got his theater in LA and I've got mine in Austin. I mean, the Film Society. Quentin actually owns that theater. Ours is, I can't own a theater.
Well, tell us about the theater.
I'm so happy to have a theater that we have that's, we show, instead of showing one movie a week or something, we're showing 20,
So, I mean, the idea is, just in the last few years, the Austin Film Society has succeeded. At first, they were renting a space to show the kind of repertory movies and the kind of smaller independent films that wouldn't come to Austin otherwise. All of this supported by the organization we're talking about. And just a couple of years ago, you bought the theater, right?
No, we just got a long-term lease.
Okay, but it's operated by...
Yeah, we raised the money to renovate it. And,
Well, talk about the kind of programs that you do there now that you have this fantasy.
Well, we're
screen.
showing some first-run films, documentaries, and you know the distributors like us. You know, we're like one more theater in Austin to show your movies at. But parallel to that, we got 2 screens, so we can show any repertory title, or we have special like little mini series, and I don't know, it's just fun. We got 2. Holly Herrick and Lars Nielsen are just 2 great programmers who are just having fun with it. And as artistic director, I just drop in and out. You know, I've been doing this long 80s series for about the last 4 years, where I'm just show films from the 80s. I'm kind of work
through
the
names.
decade.
For people here who might be interested in movies,
King of Comedy. I ended with Born on the 4th of July. That's, you know, just different sections of the 80s, because I was personally interested. I was like, when I first got into cinema, I loved these films, and a lot of them I hadn't seen since, so I just wanted to revisit them. But personally, I was making a film set in 1980, but that was in the first year. But I just kind of wanted to revisit these films that I had seen when I was just getting going. And so I can do that, just have a personal little film series. But I don't do too much. I mean, the Film Society, we got so many great people working there. It's like I was really did everything those first 10 years, but it's doing well now because we got some really good people who do the hard work, you know, and find those prints. And it's been fun to see all the new blood. You know, cinema requires new blood, you know, new people, enthusiastic. And in a nonprofit, volunteer kind of, you only have so much time you can do that. You know, I was burning out myself, you know, running it. How many prints can you ship and book films? It's kind of laborious, you know. So, as anyone who runs this festival will tell you. But, you know, you put in your time. So, but we've always had great people coming and going.
In the early days when you were first setting it up, like you were doing basically, you'd identify a filmmaker and try and track down as many of his prints as you could, like an Ozu or a Bresson or someone like that. Is that right? Or
anything. You know, distributors. You can find things. Or just you do a special series of some kind. So.
For those of you who are Czech, like I'm sure there's a version of this kind of experience where you're hungry for these movies that aren't always available to you, or you have to go on eBay or like look under rocks and things like that. And so what you were doing was at a moment when not everything was available on video, and not everything looked good on video. You know.
Yeah, we were really committed to the communal experience, and it was just greedy. Things weren't available. You couldn't. Everything wasn't available on video at that time, even though all the blockbusters were, but they were kind of slowly working through the back catalogs, which didn't include non-commercial international films so much. So you had to really seek that out and make that happen.
It's probably true everywhere in the world. There's this kind of rise and fall of cinemas. There are moments when there are art houses available, and then there are moments when they seem to all shut down, and like then you have to create an alternative kind of venue.
Yeah, the economy of that all changed. Like films, I don't know how we rose up right when film societies everywhere were going under because of home video. So we bucked that trend entirely somehow.
Yeah. So David, right around that time, like you acted in one of Rick's movies, right?
No.
Or appeared
extra.
Like,
oh, just an extra in the background.
But tell us how that happened, because that's a funny connection.
I was an intern at Detour in 1996.
So Detour is Linklater's production company.
We have 3 interns every semester.
And so that was the first. It was the first like real film company that I was. And it was great. And I think Rick was kind enough to watch like a VHS I had of some student films I made, and it was like the first time that, and along when my brother and I got a grant, was like the first time we got any like validation for our work, and that meant so much. And then when they're making the Newton Boys, and it was just like there's a million extras, so it was fun to be an extra there.
So the Newton Boys,
I forgot you interned. Isn't that funny? Isn't that funny?
It was when you're doing Suburbia.
Yeah, it's so funny. Like interns, but I just think of you as a filmmaker. I think of you as the films that have been coming. So anyway.
Well, one thing I was going to say is some of my most formative film-going experiences were in the 90s, like through the programming of AFS. That I would, just because it was either stuff that it was not available on home video, or it was, or I needed direction, you know, on things that I was unfamiliar with, like Kiarostami or Fassbinder or Bresson. Like, I did not. Yeah, there's so many eye-opening experiences that I did not have, and I wouldn't have had otherwise at that time, except through the program.
I think it's remarkable, though, how young you guys were when you were making your first feature. How old were you when you were starting your first feature? I think you guys weren't you like mid-20s?
I was 22, and my brother was 20, but I was convinced. It was when it was a couple years after, or a few years after Kevin Smith and Robert Rodriguez broke out.
Right,
and
they were
like 23. Yeah. And I just was like, oh, if you don't make it by 23, you're screwed.
See, my generation, we were all like 30-ish, you know. That age had gotten younger and younger because I think availability, technology, information, it just became more popular too. Like the new wave guys, even Godard always mentioned, he's like, you don't get to make your first film till you're 30. That's how it was before. People would give you had to just work through and do all this stuff to get empowered to get the money. And I kind of felt that way. I mean, I was making a Super 8 feature fairly early, but to just do, it's just a long way. But you guys were, did it feel like you were out of the gate early, or did you feel impatient?
Oh yeah, no, which was great. I could, you know, it was always nice to be able to go like, well, I'm ahead of Orson Welles, and that feeling fades.
When it turns out not to be Citizen Kane.
What's that?
When your debut turns out not to be Citizen Kane.
Right. That too, yeah.
Because when I first met you, we were doing Waking Life, and Kate was an animator. You were kind of
a hanger-on.
Yeah, you were around, and like, oh, you got a film you're about to do? Funny, huh?
Tell us about your first experience.
Just out of school.
I was just out. Yeah. So you know, a year out of college, I moved down to Austin, and I thought I was going to go. I had this, you know, great idea that I was going to just strike out into the heart of Texas by myself. But then slowly, a couple of my roommates and pals at that time kind of threw in their lot. They're like, "Well, we're going to move to Texas too." None of us had any reason to do this. It just sounded fun. And so Kate Dollenmeyer was one of my roommates at that time. She ended up. She was an artist and a woman of many talents, and she ended up working as an animator on Waking Life. And I hung around a lot. You know, whenever there was an animator party, I would tag along.
Do you guys know the movie Waking Life? Okay, it's an animated film that Linklater did. 2000?
We shot it in summer of '99, and we're animating most of 2000. Came out 2001.
Okay, so you were saying,
and at that time, you know, I don't know, we were all we were all in the soup of our early 20s, and that was all kind of material for me one way or another. So I got the idea in my head that Kate, who was not an actor per se and did not have a background in acting, but she was surely one of the most charismatic people I'd ever met. So I had this cockamamie notion that maybe I could write a movie for her to star in, and I wrote it at that time. And that was why I ended up leaving Austin, was in pursuit of that movie. Because then Kate went to grad school in LA, and I thought, okay, well, I'll go to LA and try to make it there. And then it fell apart there, which ended up being a great blessing, because I don't think I would have survived making that movie in LA. And then it kind of came together again in Boston. So I went back to Boston, and Kate also is from Massachusetts. And we made the movie there, and that certainly was a life-changing thing. You know, after that, I felt like I was a filmmaker.
Well, it was Funny Haha. Where did that premiere?
At the Coolidge Corner Theater in Boston. It was one of these things where, great theater. And Jerry Perry, in fact, is a critic in Boston who ended up acting in Computer Chess years later. Mm-hmm. But Jerry was the guy who programmed that screening. And it was one of those things where I made the movie. I finished it. I was holding the 16mm print 3 reels in my hands, and I was like, I don't know what to do with this. You know, I hadn't thought through to the part where you try to get anybody to show it, and I didn't know anybody. There was, I think there was already at that point, you know, there was a website called filmfestivals.com, and it had a list of them, and so I just blindly submitted to everywhere and got rejected from everywhere. And then about 6 months down the line, when I was wondering if this would ever screen anywhere, then some things started to trickle in, or I got a couple of critics in Boston to see it who Jerry, a guy named Ray Carney, and you know, it's kind of started to trickle out into the world, and had this weird extended lifespan for that reason, where we finished the movie in 2002. It had its, you know, official theatrical release in 2005. It was kind of 3 years of that movie gradually finding an audience, which was great. I'm not anxious to ever repeat that experience again, but at the time it was a really kind of nice way to let it have this slow build and gradually kind of become something. Yeah, yeah.
Well, both of you guys were sort of entering the business at a moment when there was kind of a shift where, like, Sundance was the gatekeeper to independent cinema. Did Slacker go to Sundance?
Yeah, they rejected it the first time I submitted it. It would have been the Film Festival of '90, and it was kind of still not quite finished. I sent it to them, got rejected that year, and then in the next year I premiered it. We released it ourselves, actually, in Austin, the same way we hustled up an audience for a film studies meeting.
They programmed it after it had played in Austin?
I showed it in Munich. It showed around this time. You know, it was in June of '90. It played at the Seattle Film Festival, and that's where we really kind of broke through, got, you know, an audience and extra press attention. Then we released it at the Dolby Theater in Austin ourselves, and just sold out like the first 20-something screenings.
Yeah.
And I just made a deal with Scott, the owner of that theater, the same way we showed all the Austin Film Study. Most of our screenings were at the Dolby Theater, so I just went, hey, there's this other film, and he was kind of skeptical, like, what is it?
The Dolby, you know, just to paint a picture, is
it's right by campus.
Teeny tiny little art house in the food court of one of the biggest dormitories on the UT campus. Right. So it's kind of a crazy
right on
setup.
The main.
But you had access to all the students there. Yeah.
Yeah, and the city in general. So it just kind of became a local phenomenon. And the word got out, and then I sent a video to John Pearson in New York, and he showed it to Michael Barker, who had gone to UT, and he called me up like, any movie that ends at Mount Bonnell, this place is I want to. So they were the big time. They were a big distributor, and that's when I knew in that one phone call, like, oh my God, that's like. I thought this film, we were just going to self-distribute it around the country, sell copies of it in Film Threat magazine, and, you know, be an underground movie, because it's an underground movie, largely. But then I had an official distributor saying they were going to pick it up. And so the first thing they did is they made me stop our theatrical run at the Dolby. That's how we were making a lot of money there. I was paying back people, and it was great. And it was like, pull it. I'm like, So that was in August, and then so they talked Sundance into showing, or we resubmitted it, and it was in the competition in '91. And at that, subsequently, we blew it up from 16 to 35.
You threw out a couple names there who were in the Texas film constellation. So Michael Barker is one half of the Sony Pictures Classics distributor duo.
Back then they were Orion Classics.
Right. He was at Orion.
They go out of business right around the time to pay you. What do you know? And they go to Sony.
And John Pearson, I don't think yet had a Texas connection, but he's since moved to Texas.
Yeah.
But he
was his first Texas.
What was his title? Like, he basically is the samurai who helped Slacker and Clerks and.
Oh, before that though, he had sold. She's Got to Have. He was Spike Lee's rep, and he was just this film guy. He programmed films. He and Janet are the great film couple. She now runs, for 10 years, she's run the South by Southwest Film Festival, and he taught at UT. But just a film enthusiast. What do you call John? He's just film guy, you know, film lover, but had a real head for business. And so he was the indie filmmaker's friend, mentor, guru, who would take an indie film and try to place it with distributors. So he did that. I had sent him a tape, and I never even heard back from him, like he was going to represent the film. And we already had a distributor, so he even kind of said, I'll deny it behind our back. We didn't even have an agreement for me to represent this film, but I just kind of slipped it to Michael Barker, whose younger brother liked it because he was in his 20s. Or, you know, you just get lucky. You got to get lucky in this world. But I think we were ready. We had, you know, a lot of effort had been there. So I just got lucky, and that, you know.
And that was the beginning of a generation where Sundance really played a big role. Even El Mariachi, I think, was at Telluride and then did Sundance.
Yeah, Robert won like the dramatic, the audience award or
But by the
whatever.
time that you guys were coming along, Sundance was like so choked with a certain kind of independent film that was much more like Juno-y kind of movies, you know, like, I don't even know, but Little Miss Sunshine kind of things where, you know, they're really polished and they have big actors in them now. And it's
now, back then, there really were no known actors in the competition films.
Right.
There would be some premieres. But yeah, the films where there was a lot of like the kid who grew up on the farm moving off to the big city. And, you know, there were a lot of these.
Last night at the Alamo.
They felt like TV movies, a lot of them. You know, when you went there, we saw all of them. I'm like, oh, these are. And we were treated like the weirdos. There were 3 like weird films there. Todd Haynes' Poison, Slacker, and maybe there were a couple others. We were sort of the. You know, they were excited about all these other films because they seemed like real films, and ours, we were the weirdo outcasts. Like Slacker did not win anything. It was just some odd film. But it caught an audience, but it was, fortunately, it didn't come out till that next summer. So kind of like what Andrew described. These years are going by in your life, by the way. All you want to do is make your next film, but you kind of have to shepherd this thing through the world. So,
and
you know.
At what point did you guys, I know, David, you and Nathan were kind of early recipients of support from the Austin Film Society. Was that on features or earlier on, even with shorts? Or?
It was the first year they did a grant. We were that summer we were making our first feature and we're fortunate enough to get a grant, and it made a huge difference. And
For Plastic Utopia?
Yeah, this movie.
How much did we give you?
$1,000 or no? I think 1,200. I think.
Yeah,
and,
that first year we only gave out like 30,000.
Yeah,
so.
yeah, no, and it was incredible. I mean, it was a huge help for us in finishing it, but then also just a sense of validation in that. I mean, it's not a good. I don't know. No one's ever seen it.
Wait, say the
It's
name.
terrific. It's terrific.
It's real good.
Say the name of the film again.
Oh, it's called Plastic Utopia. I haven't watched it in like 20 years, but Andrew lost it. I lost.
You
the
lost
bet.
the bet.
I lost a bet, and I had to give Andrew the print for a while.
It took a long time. We went double or
What was
nothing
the
on the
bet?
bet and triple or nothing.
It was a dumb bet.
It's a long
It's
story.
a dumb bet.
Yeah.
What I admire about David and Nathan is like we talk about these years we're losing. I don't think you guys lose time because while you're finished that, you make 4 shorts and something else. Like there's a spigot here that got turned on a long time ago that's just flowing films and shorts and stuff. So I'm always admired you guys just crazy, pure creativity via films. So it's just been so fun to see the next film and the next film and the short, 3 shorts in between the features, and you know it just keeps coming. It's amazing.
Well, it's funny when, like, I don't know, different ages, like, I thought in my head, I went to film school, and they didn't, at that time, they didn't prepare you at all for what you do when you graduate. It was just
not.
like, you thrown to the wolves, and yeah, and then almost, like, I only know one other person in my class, the classes I was in that actually went and worked in film after. Everyone was just like, okay, now I'm going to go work in IT or something, but in my head we're kind of wired at that time. I was like, okay, you make shorts in film school, and then you graduate at 21 or 22 or whatever, and then you're a big boy and you move on to features, and that's the way it is. So right after college, made a feature, it didn't go anywhere, and then made another one that didn't go anywhere, and then after that was like, okay, let's go back to shorts because I'm so broke, and then that was so liberating, just because there was low stakes and time invested in that, and then video was accessible, and then kind of playing the percentages with festivals, which is I think where we're making things, because you can make 3 shorts and maybe one will get in.
Where did you feel like you had reached a point where you could call yourself a filmmaker, do that for a living, or?
I'm still trying. I don't know.
When does that point hit, Andrew? You there? You feel?
No. But it's always. But I think that's part of. I fear, like, God forbid, the day that I feel comfortable.
I know, or you're, like entitled or something. Like I was talking to Andrew earlier about his new film. He's like, I felt this is the one. This is the end of it. You feel that way. This is the last film they're ever going to let me make.
I've never made one that I didn't think was the last one, and then you realize you don't know how to do anything else. So you're like, all right, I'll do another one.
Yeah.
And what was your first sort of Texas-based project?
Well, I wrote the first movie in Texas, and there are these. I think there's these kind of weird, like vestigial, elements or references to Austin that end up in the first two movies. But then my third film, Beeswax, it was this kind of odd thing where I'd written it in Boston, where I was living again at the time, but I wrote it for a pair of twin sisters to star in, one of whom was in school in New Haven and the other one was living in Atlanta, and I was working with producers who, one was in New York, one was in LA. It was like there was no obvious place to do this, even though I didn't really write it for Boston. And so we were talking about, well, where should we actually shoot this thing? And somebody said, how about Austin? And I said, well, that sounds great. But it ended up being, there was this bizarre, that movie takes place, a lot of the action is around, one of the twin sisters co-owns a vintage clothing shop, but she's also in a wheelchair, as the actor was. And as I wrote that, it didn't really occur to me that there are very few, most vintage clothing stores are very inaccessible. They're very narrow, and things are packed in very tightly. And so I realized, and we didn't have the budget to build a place really. I really wanted to find a perfect place, which was a lot to ask for. But I went to Austin, I did a little scouting trip. I went to every vintage store in Austin. There was one that kept being closed. And as I was driving to the airport, I thought, let me try to stop in this place one more time. And I went in, and it was perfect. And everything was laid out exactly the way I wrote it in my script. And I talked to the owner, and I said, I'm a filmmaker. I'm thinking about this actually would be a really good location for a film I'm thinking of making. And she said, well, would you need to close the store down for a long time? I said, unfortunately, it's a pretty major location, so yeah, we would definitely need several days. She said, well, that's great. I love closing down the store. And
only in Austin.
Yeah, well, they went out of business not long thereafter.
They took all the money you'd given them and moved to Hawaii.
That's right. That's what it was. But yeah, it was just one of those things. I was like, well, this is clear. If I'm asking for a sign, this is it. Everything about that place seemed perfect, and they were so, So, okay, yes, we'll shoot the movie in Austin, which I thought would just be a great way to spend, a few months hanging out in Austin, which I still loved, and I still kept in touch with people. But then in the course of shooting that movie, a great surprise to me, I fell in love and decided I should marry somebody and have kids with her, and that was a great reason to move back to Austin.
And she had a job locally, so.
And she what?
She worked locally, right?
Well, she's a writer, so
yeah. But she had the gig.
Yeah. No, there was no. I mean, the conversation we had was, if you love somebody, you don't make them move to Boston. I was very happy to have the excuse to come back, because I'd hankered anyway for years. Like, wouldn't it be great if there was some way for me to move back to Austin someday? I'd really fallen in love with it in my early 20s.
I'd like to open this up, not just immediately to the audience for some questions, but just before that, I think it's worth, we've been pretty humble about some of the achievements of the Austin Film Society, but in the last few years, there's some pretty incredible things you guys have done. Would you talk about the studios and some of the bigger kind of projects that have grown out of this little organization that you founded?
Yeah, we take these big leaps about every 10 years or so. They closed down our airport in the middle of town and moved it out of town a little bit to an old Air Force base. This is in the late 90s. So there's 700 acres sitting there empty. There are all these big metal buildings. And I was talking to this projectionist friend of mine, Stan, who I'd worked with. He did dailies and stuff. And he's like, well, he had been wanting to get a studio made. He thought Austin should do it. He says, well, if Austin really cared, they would put their money where their mouth is and make those. And so just in a conversation with him, I was like, yeah, that's a really great idea. These big empty metal buildings. I had just done a big film, and my art department was in north of town. My, construction was somewhere else. And we were all scattered. There wasn't infrastructure or facilities for bigger movies. You had to rent warehouses in different places and kind of piece together your infrastructure for your movie. So I immediately thought, that's a great idea. We could get that. And so that began about a year trek of getting that through the local city government to buy on to that idea. But we built a coalition with the neighborhood, and that's the difference. A town like Austin, if you go into the mayor's office in another city and say, hey, give us 20 acres, and it'll be good for our industry and, you know, whatever, they would just, you know, get out of here. What are you talking about? You know, we're not going to give you what's ours. But they did. Austin, all the city council, we'd go around. It was like getting a bill through Congress, but, you know, you go meet with them, and they're like, oh, yeah, well, that sounds great. Yeah, you should. So this is before they started developing that place. Now, cut to almost 20 years later, you know, it's a huge housing development. It's everywhere. You've filmed there. You made a whole movie kind of in the neighborhoods that they've built up around there. But we have our 20 acres, and those big empty airplane hangars we've now air conditioned and soundproofed. We've just, over the years, we get it for $1 a year from the city, but we have a lease until like 2080 something. They own it, but we're managing it. It's been great. You know, they actually say the economic benefit to Austin. You know, the Coen brothers come in and shoot True Grit there, and we've used it. The economic benefit for the films that have come through is really over $1 billion of economic stimulus through the city. So it's been a great success on that level, and I was glad to say we did what we proposed. You know, we came through with what we said we would do. They like us so much. They have a local access TV stations. They have 3 TV stations with the cable thing that are just available to citizens, and we've taken that over in the last couple of years, and we manage that now, which goes with our education initiative. So I can say we have 2 movie screens, and we have 3 TV channels, so you can put up your own show. Any citizen can make their own show. They can go on. It's the ultimate democratization of media, which I think we're all for, and a young person can come in and get cameras and learn media literacy, and we're in schools. So those are the leaps, you know, like I think those TV stations and the studio facility for the local industry. But I think that's great infrastructure, like the industry, but I care more about the culture. You know, I care about what we're screening and the filmmakers and stuff. So.
But what that has done is that it's cultivated not only a community of cinephiles, like the screening series, but also now filmmakers have infrastructure. The public access channel you mentioned is where I think both you and Rodriguez worked on your first films, doing the post, basically.
That was kind of how you did it. I remember shooting my first film. I shot on Super 8, transferred it to video, then edited it at the... This is before you could edit on your laptop. You know, you had to go somewhere. It was a technological challenge just to get the equipment. So we edited on 3/4 inch. You know, it's like a TV. But you could shoot on film. Robert shot on 16. I shot on Super 8. I was a couple years, you know, several years ahead of him. But we kind of did the same thing: shoot on film, edit at this facility, and then have a VHS copy that you could hand someone and say, "Hey, I made a film." You know, so you could do that fairly inexpensively.
And Robert Rodriguez now is set up either on or adjacent to the studios.
Yeah, just adjoining our property practically. It was state-owned a facility, but the same kind of thing. So he'll use our place for... Robert is currently making the biggest film ever made in Texas. It's a James Cameron produced film. Did you go to that party at South by? There was we got to go through the set. I visited a couple times when they were shooting it. It's huge. It's this incredible.
Is that Alita?
Big Alita.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Coming out soon, but they built this huge city, and it's pretty amazing. Yeah, Robert's incredible. You know, he's just not only creatively but entrepreneurially. Let's say he's a real visionary.
And from the grant program, just to sort of put a cap on that, I mean, there's been almost $2 million now that's been fed back into the local film industry, and in these very modest packages. So that $2 million has gone a long way by helping a lot of projects, right?
Yeah, you think so. You know, filmmakers come out of it with whatever, somewhere between 1,000 and 5 or something. You know, we got given some bigger grants too, 10 and stuff for certain features. And
David, since you've benefited from a few times, just give a sense of like what those little gifts can mean. Like sometimes it's travel, sometimes it's post.
Yeah, I think. made the difference between being able to finish a film or not at the point. Then
you would have eventually. It's
eventually,
just,
but at that moment, but it just, well, yeah, and then also like the travel grants, because it's so expensive to go to festivals and that sort of thing, and so there's so many festivals that where it made it a lot easier going because of those travel grants.
Andrew, have you been a beneficiary too?
Yeah. I think at least 2, maybe 3 movies, and yeah, it makes a huge. I mean, Beeswax and Computer Chess are both movies with low 6-figure budgets, and so a nice big 4-figure hit. It's significant. It's a real percentage of your budget, and every cent counts. I mean, everything you're scrambling for, and everything you owe everybody all the time, and so. I don't remember, I can't tell you exactly which line items were what, but I know that it makes a big difference for sure.
Making a film, every bit helps. You got to piece it together.
Well, and there's that irony of like you finish a movie, it's been accepted at Sundance or Berlin or something like that, and you're like, well, my bank account's empty. Nice that
afford a plane ticket. Yeah,
sure. And so the Austin Film Society will often step in and give the filmmaker wings to go to that place. All right, so now is a chance to wrap up with a few questions from you guys. I'll repeat them, or I don't know if we can all hear, but go ahead. You in the front row, go. You can start.
I'm just curious, at a time when there has been extensive cuts for arts in the U.S. under the new administration, I'm just curious, do you think you guys, what kind of role are you playing now? Do you think Austin Film Society has a bigger role to play now? And why do you guys keep going back to Austin? Richard, why you never thought of leaving?
So I'll repeat the question really briefly. With the administration and just a general sort of cuts to arts support, does that mean that Austin Film Society is playing a bigger role, and why Austin?
I've been following this issue of public arts funding for 30 whatever years, just because it involves the organization, and I've seen this so many times where a new administration will come in, conservative. Trump wanted to zero out. They always want to cut the arts, and they trim it down, but they never cut it completely. They always try, but inevitably they realize even the most fiscally conservative, whatever, their granddaughter's in ballet, at the ballet. You really want to cut her? Shut down the ballet? Do you really want to shut down the opera? Do you really want to shut down the symphony? The ones that you like, you just don't like radical visual artists, but you like those, but they're all arts. So they think about it. It's a gut impulse to just, let's get rid of all this, because let's face it, artists are dissenters. They're dangerous people, historically, potentially, not to be trusted. So their impulse is to shut it down. But then the better angels, usually their wives, hopefully our daughters are in their ballet outfits, can win that. So they never totally, but we're talking peanuts anyway. The U.S. doesn't have we don't have public funding. I mean, the city of, I just know because I'm familiar with certain cities, I would imagine the city of Prague probably spends more on the arts than the entire country of the U.S. Just a guess. I know the city of Vienna has more funding than the entire United States. So we're only talking a couple $100 million to begin with. So.
All right, next question. We've got a mic out in the audience.
My question is along those lines, but with all the politics going on in the U.S. right now, and with Austin being this sort of creative hub, do you feel, I don't know if inspired is the right word, but to try to make a film or some kind of programming that is around, I don't want to, the immigrant issue or just any of these issues? Yeah, I know, Richard, you said you've done a few things on the political side. I'm just curious.
Well, that's the question's really politics and arts. Do you have a political film
That's
there?
a big question. I mean, this is like a grand philosophical question. I mean, in some ways, it's like anything you do is kind of, depending where you're at, I think it always feels a little bit political. I think I'm in this odd situation with my new film, Support the Girls, which is playing here, that it was something that, as I was writing it, because it's about women in a kind of, at least ostensibly oppressive workplace. And that was something that, at the time I was writing it, before the election, I thought, I don't know if anybody's going to be interested in this. I don't know if this might seem irrelevant to everyone. And then the night of the election, I couldn't sleep, but among many other thoughts going through my head, one thought was like, well, I guess this is relevant now. And it does it. And then so much has changed culturally. So, I mean, we're in a time of like unbelievable cultural upheaval.
Good timing, Andrew. Good timing.
Well, I don't know if it's good timing. It might be bad timing
for your movie.
because, what's that? Well, and now I read reviews, and reviews also will kind of, people will put a political spin in a way which may or may not be, what I was thinking. But that's every movie lives and breathes in whatever time it happens to get dropped into. And
you can't really pinpoint, like there's a 1 year to 18-month delay between the time you're inspired politically to a film they're watching. It might be, maybe some documentaries or certain things can come together quicker. I know Michael Moore has a film coming out, he says, right before the midterm elections, so he's always promoting that. But I think film is not as immediate a political art form the way others might be, music and stuff. So we're sort of ships passing, but you can't really time it. But I don't know what the proper medium is for the response. We live in such a media age, I don't know if film storytelling and there's you want to. You're being driven crazy in your mind, like you said. You couldn't go to sleep. Yeah, but it's what everybody struggles with, I think.
Well, and I think work can be political without being a statement per se. And certainly my movie was, I never have and would never intend to make a movie that's vote yes on this, vote no on that. Like it's not, but I saw a great quote in the New York Times the other week. They were interviewing the guy, Boots Riley, who made Sorry to Bother You, which I haven't seen yet. But he had a line about, he's, all art is political, even if most of it's just endorsing the status quo. And that rings true to me, that, you can see something that seems to have nothing to do with anything, and that is political in its own way. This all might be a very abstract way of thinking of it, but anyway.
Other questions? Great. There's a mic there.
Hello. I would like to ask about Richard, about your movie Boyhood. If you can share something for us filmmakers. Of course, it was a special project because you shoot it for so long. But if you can share some special experience you had, like technical experience, something interesting for people from the job, also from the industry.
That's a big, wide open question. It's something interesting. Well, I don't know. It was a journey, a life project. It was just really filmmakers were just trying to tell stories. I was trying to tell a story of childhood, and that was the only way I could tell that story. I had that idea, and I just followed it through. Most films, I have a long gestation. I think about them 5, 10 years before I'm actually making them. That one was the opposite. I had the idea, and I was shooting it less than a year later, but it was such a longitudinal project that I was still discovering it at the very end. So, you create the right form to tell your story. Cinema is up for that. So, unique feelings go with that. Even, like when you make a movie, the last day of production is kind of bittersweet. You're kind of glad to be through it, but you're going to miss people. And in the last shot, it's called the martini shot. You're kind of like, oh, it's the last setup, and the crew's kind of buzzing. But so you can imagine, everything was times 12. So you can imagine the 12th year, the last shot. it was intense. It was intense. I know I'll never quite feel that way again, just due to what had gone behind it, you know. So.
All right, maybe a couple more questions. Sound okay? There's another one in the front row here.
Hi. So I was wondering about the Austin Film Society. It started off as a way to promote homegrown talent, and now it feels like it's growing to the point where it's attracting productions to come to Austin. Am I right? Or
Yeah, on a professional level, Austin was kind of a destination where people kind of wanted to shoot. You can't shoot every film in Los Angeles, you know. So the local look, you can drive in any direction and get a lot of different looks. You can have very urban, you can have desert, you can have woods, you can have country. So it's conducive to a lot of films, bigger productions. So you can use it that way. So we always hope to attract more, keep our friends and crew members employed. But we're in a battle locally too. There's incentive programs in our state. The state government kind of hates Austin, and they've defunded our incentive program. So we're kind of in a battle with the state. My last 2 films I've done have been out of state.
What do they hate Austin?
Bunch of liberals, you know, a bunch of commies. No. No, I don't know. It's a conservative state, and they just don't. I mean, you know, it's pretty
Yes.
obvious. We don't vote for them.
All right, another last question. Looking over your filmographies, in terms of to what extent your films represent the state, and have sometimes directly sort of redefined maybe what people's idea of Texas is, would you just say, you know, from your filmography, what do you think is the most Texas film or element, you know, from your work, and give us a taste of how you're kind of rewriting. It's when I moved to Texas when I was 10, I was expecting tumbleweeds and cowboy boots and people riding through town on horseback, and that's something that I think Slacker Forward has rewritten, etc. If each of you would just sort of maybe close with that image, so that when we go back and watch a film from your
Or what about you, Dave? Do you feel your films take?
The film festival. That's
Yeah,
But that was
Damsel.
not necessarily Texas, but
All westerns are Texas.
Yeah. Well, I think I have a western, but we shot it in Utah and Oregon, so for tax reasons and then landscape reasons. But I don't know. The film that I'm showing tomorrow, Kid Thing, that I shot, like half of it was shot in Austin and half of it was shot in the town I grew up in the same woods. That it's about a little girl who's a child delinquent and a lot of it takes place just riding BMX bikes in the woods and that sort of thing. And I don't know, and took a lot of things from growing up and then made them stranger, but for purposes of the movie. But I don't know, that one for me personally, it was that felt like the most like Texas thing.
Grounded in Texas, yeah, definitely.
When I've done 4 movies in Austin, I probably this new one, Support the Girls, is the most Texan. But I think the one I did before that, Results, is very Austin to me, and that was the only time that I really sat down and thought I want to do something about this town that I live in, because Rick talked about how much Austin changed from the 80s to the 90s. Well, the 90s Austin was the one that I was introduced to. So which is now kind of morphed into whatever it is now. But Austin now, and I say this with a lot of love, is a yuppie paradise. It's an exceedingly pleasant place to live, and there are nice restaurants everywhere. I never eat bad food in Austin.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. And so, I was certainly aware when we were making Results, and this is a movie about personal trainers. It's a movie about that kind of, yuppie might not be exactly right, but that kind of aspirational culture and that thing that Austin's become. It was fun to make that movie and realize, it was very much about Austin. It had certainly no cowboys, I don't think, and none of that stuff, and even really, sadly enough, very little of the kind of slacker Austin either. It was
that was long gone too.
Yeah. So that was my contribution to the Austin canon, I guess.
Yeah, I like that. And my own, So many of my movies don't take place in Texas, really. I've shot them there, but they're kind of in any, like Dazed and Confused is kind of anywhere USA. If you look closely, it's got Texas license plates on the cars, but I never really wanted to say this is Texas. I think Slacker's probably my biggest Austin movie. Boyhood, it never leaves the border of Texas, so you get a lot of Texas, urban, Houston, San Marcos, a little college town, West Texas, he goes to college. So you get a lot of different looks, East Texas, so you get a lot of looks. But I think my most Texas film in my mind is a film I did a few years ago. I don't know, it didn't show much around, it was called Bernie, and it was a kind of a story from kind of where I grew up in deep East Texas. It was kind of a true crime murder story, but it really wears its Texasness on its sleeve. A guy explains Texas at the beginning of the movie in a really funny way with a map and things like that. So that was real Texas. And another one, you can't help it but reflect where you're living and the myths and stories from where you... I love the Texas storytelling tradition. I guess I grew up with it, and I've rebelled against it over the years. I didn't like country music. I was like punk rock, and I didn't like all those because they seemed kind of backwards. I was trying to be more, but as I get older, I appreciate it more. The more what's actually been there under my nose my whole life. So I kind of like the Western tradition and all that now.
Those are all great examples, and I think maybe it's a good reminder for like the series that's here in the festival, if you get a chance to see one or all or as many as you can, that they really give you a picture of a state that isn't, I think, what Hollywood has conveyed over the years. This is like, an autobiographical portrait of Texas by people who live there. Go ahead.
Please come to Kid Thing that Dave described in Computer Chess. The earlier films by them, and then of course their current films, support The Girls and Damsel. These are amazing films, and where they're at in their careers is so exciting to watch. But those two earlier films that are part of that series are definitely worth checking out. So Computer Chess is so telling because it's about tech. There's this. Austin has been driven by slow technology. Do you want to just say a couple words about it real quick?
No, I enjoy hearing you say a couple words about it.
It's set in what, 80?
Yeah, thereabouts, yeah.
Yeah, early, it's black and white video as if it was shot back then. It's really, really brilliant. And it's about a conference, Computer Chess. There it is in the title. But it actually looks like an artifact from that time. It's just, I don't know. It's so...
It's, as I think, glaringly obvious from everything we've discussed in this panel, everything that Rick is unbelievably supportive of everyone in the Austin film community, and it's certainly, I think, I'll speak on behalf of, as people who, as kids who saw his work and were attracted to it, it's a real delight and an honor to have him be as kind and generous as he has been to all of us.
I don't like
Here.
The old man who's not.
Well, thank you guys all so much. I'm sorry I didn't get to your question, but these guys are around the festival for the next few days, and as you can see, they're really like stuck up and really hard to approach. I mean, I think like I think you could probably catch them in the terminal or on the streets or whatever, and tell them about your connection to their movies. And I hope you'll see them. So thank you for your question.
Thank you for having us
at
your festival. Come see the movies. So.
Let's hear it for these guys.
Yeah, thank you.